because gas prices here in the U.S. crossed an average of $4 a gallon this morning as the war with Iran stretches into its second month. It's the first time prices surged to this point since August of 2022, when Russia's war against Ukraine shook energy markets. This just the latest sign of the impact of the conflict in the Middle East on costs here in the United States. And then there's this new reporting from the Wall Street Journal, which suggests it may continue to get worse. According to administration officials, President Trump has told aides he's willing to end the war in Iran, even if the Strait of Hormuz remains largely closed. Officials tell the paper that in recent days, President Trump and his aides assessed that forcing the crucial waterway open would mean extending the military mission beyond the 4 to 6 week preferred timeline. Given that, officials say the president decided the U.S. should instead prioritize degrading Iran's Navy and missile stocks, while pressuring Tehran diplomatically to resume the free flow of trade. If that fails, the Journal reports, Washington would then press allies in Europe and the Gulf to take the lead on reopening the strait. It's a move that experts call irresponsible, warning that there is no insulating the U.S. from the escalating economic damage associated with the closed waterway, as seen today in those soaring gas prices and oil shocks. Meanwhile, attacks across the region continued this morning. Tehran reported large explosions, sparking initial power outages. And Saudi Arabia said it destroyed 10 incoming Iranian drones in just the past few hours. The AP, meanwhile, has new reporting on U.S. allies in the Gulf, privately urging President Trump to continue and intensify the war against Iran. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain are making the case that the war should not end because Tehran hasn't been weakened enough. That's according to U.S., Gulf, and Israeli officials. The AP reports that these governments initially complained that they were not given advance notice by the U.S. and Israel before the conflict started, and that the U.S. ignored their warnings that a war would have devastating consequences for the entire region. But some officials from these countries now view the war as an historic opportunity to cripple Tehran's clerical rule once and for all. President Trump was asked about Gulf allies Sunday night while on Air Force One.
Do you want to see Gulf countries that are being attacked by Iran to start to fight back?
They are fighting back. Saudi Arabia is fighting back hard. Qatar is fighting back. UAE is fighting back. Kuwait's fighting back. Bahrain's fighting back. They're all fighting back. Actually, they were surprised to be hit. I was very surprised they got hit. And once they got hit, they started fighting very well. We're very strong communications with all of those countries, and they've all been fighting. They're 100% on our side.
But as the AP notes, while the Gulf countries host U.S. forces and bases from which the military has launched attacks on Iran, the countries themselves have not joined the offensive strikes. Here on set with me, retired CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos. He's an MS Now national security and intelligence analyst. Mark, let's start there on Gulf nations privately urging the president to continue the conflict and the ways in which that stands in contrast to what the Journal and others are reporting, that the president effectively is bored, as our colleague Jake Traylor reported at the end of the week, bored with the conflict that he said he wanted to take 4 to 6 weeks. But war doesn't always go according to a timeline.
No, Ali, you're right. The enemy gets a vote. And of course, the timelines on war, we've seen this in history, even recent history, in Iraq and Afghanistan. So these notions of kind of quick conflicts, that just doesn't ever come to pass. But this whiplash that we're seeing right now, and I think all the reporting is actually accurate. In your introduction, you actually laid out all the things that are happening, and all of those are true. And so everyone is kind of scratching their head on this, strategic incoherence. And so I think the Gulf allies are correct. If we kind of take our toys and go home, if Trump gets bored and walks away, one can make an argument this was a complete and utter fiasco. You have an angry Iran. You've poked the bear. They're going to rush to a nuclear weapon. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. And the war objectives now, which seem to be much more limited, are good in one sense. Iran's military is degraded, but nothing much else. And the Gulf allies are really worried. They live in that region right next door to Iran, who are going to be angry and lashing out. And the United States then, packs up and goes home. That is not something that's a recipe, for any kind of positive outcome to this war. I don't think that's where President Trump is going to end up. I think he's frustrated, but at the end of the day, there's going to be too much pressure on him not to just kind of pack up and go home.
And at the same time, there are military assets in the region that tell a different story about what escalation might look like, and the fact that they are standing there at the ready, which, if we even go back just a few months ago, we were watching all of these military assets move into the region and saying that it wasn't a matter of if war with Iran was imminent, but when, and we saw that question answered then in a few weeks' time.
So one thing that I think we've seen with President Trump, and, we always talk about this taco, he kind of, chickens out at the last minute. But that hasn't happened recently. He deployed U.S. forces, on the coast of Venezuela, and he used them. Same thing with Iran. He did launch the war. And so, with buildup like this, you have the Marine Expeditionary Unit, one of them on station, another one about to get there, 82nd Airborne arriving, and the Joint Special Operations Command. And there is something to that, in that we have Navy SEALs and Delta Force, Special Operations Aviation units, all poised to possibly go in and kind of deal with the nuclear file. It's hard for me to think that he's not going to use these, because past precedent indicates that he will. Again, really risky missions, though, and there are going to be people in the U.S. military command who are going to tell him, if you do this, there's going to be U.S. casualties, and then you start thinking about the political blowback on that as well. So there's no really great choices here, but those military assets that are deployed, history is telling us that Trump will use them.
I also think when you look at the political dynamics, we started by talking about the affordability cost and the fact that it's only likely to get worse, especially if the administration decides to leave and the Strait of Hormuz is staying closed. But at the same time, doesn't this also mark what the American public is saying that they want? It is an unpopular war, one that the administration never really sold to the public. And so I don't know that the public necessarily knows what to make of it, especially when the objectives have been so muddily defined. But at the same time, isn't it what they're wanting to say, OK, we don't want to continue a long-term conflict here? That's never what we were told about. What would you tell an American public that says, OK, they're leaving? Isn't that good?
So, right. And so, on the one hand, for those of us in the foreign policy, the chattering classes, this would be probably a strategic mess for the United States if we pack up and go home. I don't know politically, though, if it's going to damage the president whatsoever, because the war is so unpopular. And Ali, the amazing thing is usually at the beginning of conflicts, and we're only a month in, the popularity of a president and the support from the American public is always there. It's not there at all now. And so there's a very strong political argument to make for him to kind of pack up and go home. But in the national security world, I think a lot of us would say, well, hold on a second. None of these objectives have been met. And the region might end up actually being worse off with kind of, again, an angry bear, Iran, that's been poked, but not defeated. Yeah,
I think that's the important thing, because often you see those two sides in tension, right? An American public that is eager for peace and a national security apparatus that says, OK, you've already done the initial moves here. You've got to finish what you started, and you can't leave the region worse off. Right. And then I think when we're starting to look at the administration trying to find an off-ramp, it's instructive the way that key administration officials have been speaking. So let's spotlight Secretary of State Marco Rubio, because he criticized NATO allies yesterday during an interview with Al Jazeera, accusing them of not doing enough to help the United States. Watch.
Do you believe the EU and NATO countries betrayed the U.S. at this crucial moment?
I think it was very disappointing. You have this, and again, look, the president and our country will have to re-examine all of this after this operation is over. But one of the reasons why NATO is beneficial to the United States is it gives us basing rights for contingencies. It allows us to station troops and aircraft and weapons and in parts of the world that we wouldn't normally have bases. NATO is just about us defending Europe if they're attacked, but them denying us basing rights when we need them. That's not a very good arrangement. That's a hard one to stay engaged in and say this is good for the United States. So all of that's going to have to be re-examined.
So those comments are notable, taken side by side with the fact that he's also now laying out some metrics for success that don't include things like nuclear, which was so central initially to the initial phase of going into Iran. So can you talk about what you see in Rubio's shifting messages? Let's also be honest, if he wants to keep his job, he was never going to go in there and defend NATO. It's nothing that Trump is a fan of. But talk about what you're seeing here, because this is instructive.
So, Ali, I'm a huge fan of the Kremlinology of the administration.
Me too.
And watching Marco Rubio, to me, is fascinating. Someone who's championed human rights and democracy, was on the right side of so many issues, and kind of some of his kind of core principles, I think he's had to sacrifice.
I mean, this is his foreign policy.
It is. And yesterday I was on MS Now, and I said, where's Rubio? And then he pops up on Al Jazeera, and he lays out objectives that, frankly, have been met already. So he's actually laying the foundation for the, OK, we're done, let's go home. Yeah. But you raised a great point. The fundamental reason we are there in Iran right now is because of the nuclear question. That was the objective. And all of a sudden, people are not talking about that now. So is that because diplomacy is going to solve this? Unlikely. Or are we going to say, that's it, we're done, and go home? But Rubio is positioning himself, and everyone saw that interview and said, well, wow, those objectives have now been diminished. So, I mean, the destruction of the Iranian Navy, done. It's over. Degradation of the missile capability, got it. We're there already. Does this actually pretend a signal for the administration to do this or not? Again, but you don't know because there's no coherence amongst all the national security team, and Trump can then come out and then threaten, as he did yesterday, war crimes, hitting desalinization plants. Who the heck knows?
Yeah, I think that's another key piece of this that we'll keep following through more administration briefings and conversations with officials, because that is going to be really important, especially as Congress is now asking for more information and an investigation into the bombing of that Iranian school for girls. I think that is just one piece of this puzzle that we are watching actively be put together here in Washington, with big questions about what it looks like going forward. Retired CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos, I am now, if you have the power of suggesting someone and then getting them an interview, I'm going to now put all my interview requests through you, and let's just see who we can get on the show. Thank you.